Have you ever wondered what would happen if you stopped talking? Not for 1 hour, not for one day, but for 7 full days. No explanations, no small talk, no reactions, no words. Would people notice? Would they feel uncomfortable? Or would they treat you differently? I didn't start this as an experiment. I didn't plan it. I didn't even think it would matter. It began with something small. One morning, I woke up feeling tired, not physically, but mentally. Too many conversations, too many opinions, too many things I said that I didn't really mean. Have you ever had that feeling? When you talk, but it doesn't feel honest? When you respond, but your mind is somewhere else? That morning, I looked at myself in the mirror and something felt off. I asked myself a simple question. What would happen if I just stopped talking? At first, it sounded impossible, even strange. We talk all the time, at work, at home, with friends, with strangers. Talking is normal, expected. Silence is not. But that day, I decided to try. Just for one day, I told myself, I will not speak unless it is absolutely necessary. It sounded simple. It was not. The first moment came quickly. At breakfast, my family was already talking, asking questions, sharing small stories. Normally, I would join in, add something, react, laugh. But this time, I stayed quiet. I smiled, I nodded, but I didn't speak. At first, no one noticed. Then, my mother looked at me. "You're quiet today," she said. I smiled again, still silent. She waited for a response, but none came. There was a small pause, a moment of confusion. Then the conversation continued. Without me. That felt strange. I was there, but not really part of it. After breakfast, I went to work. This was going to be harder. Work is full of talking, meetings, discussions, quick questions. How could I stay silent here? I didn't have a clear plan, only a simple rule. Speak only when truly necessary. When I arrived, people greeted me. Good morning. I nodded, smiled, but said nothing. Some people didn't notice. Some people looked confused. One colleague stopped and asked, "Are you okay?" I nodded again. "I'm just a little quiet today," I wrote on a small piece of paper. He looked at it, then at me. "All right," he said slowly. That was the first time I realized something important. When you don't speak, people don't know what to do. They expect words. They wait for them. And when they don't come, something changes. The morning continued. In meetings, I listened carefully, more carefully than ever before. Without thinking about what to say next, I could hear everything more clearly. The tone of voices, the pauses, the small details. Things I usually missed because I was too busy preparing my response. Now, there was no response, only listening. At first, it felt uncomfortable, like I was losing control. But slowly, something else appeared. Clarity. I began to understand people better. Not just their words, but their emotions. Who was confident? Who was unsure? Who wanted attention? Who needed support? All without speaking. That surprised me. In the past, I thought communication was about talking. But now, I started to see something different. Maybe communication is more about listening. By the middle of the day, something unexpected happened. People started treating me differently, not in a big way, not in an obvious way, but in small, subtle changes. They spoke slower around me. They explained things more clearly. They watched my reactions more closely. And some people respected my silence more than my words. That was new. I didn't understand it yet, but I could feel it. Something was changing. not outside, but inside. And this was only the first day. By the end of the first day, I felt something unusual, not tired from talking, but calm from not talking. That night, my mind was quieter. There were still thoughts, but fewer of them, and they moved slower. I didn't feel the need to explain myself. I didn't replay conversations in my head. I didn't wonder, did I say the wrong thing? Because I hadn't said much at all. That felt peaceful. The next morning, I made a decision. I would continue, not just one day, but longer, maybe 3 days, maybe more. I didn't know exactly how long, but something inside me wanted to see what would happen next. Day 2 began. At breakfast, my family looked at me again. "You're still quiet?" my mother asked. I nodded. This time, there was less confusion, more curiosity. They didn't push. They didn't force me to speak. They simply accepted it. That was the first small change. When you stay consistent, people begin to adjust. At work, things became more interesting. People had already noticed. Now, they were watching more carefully. One colleague started speaking slower to me, another used more gestures. Someone even wrote things down for me. Without saying anything, I had changed the way people communicated with me. That was powerful. In meetings, I noticed something even more surprising. When I didn't speak, I wasn't interrupted because there was nothing to interrupt. Instead, people gave me space. Sometimes, they even asked for my opinion more directly. "What do you think?" someone asked. I paused. Then I wrote a short answer. Simple, clear, only the most important point. And something interesting happened. People listened more. They didn't interrupt. They didn't argue quickly. They paid attention. Why? Because I didn't speak often. So when I did, it mattered more. That changed my understanding completely. Before, I thought speaking more meant being more important. Now, I started to see the opposite. Speaking less can make your words stronger. In the afternoon, I had a short conversation with a coworker, not with words, but with presence. He was talking about a problem, something that was bothering him. Usually, I would respond quickly, give advice, share my opinion. But this time, I just listened, fully. I looked at him, nodded slowly, stayed present, and he kept talking, more than usual, deeper than usual. At one point, he stopped and said something unexpected. "Thanks, I feel better." I hadn't said anything, not one word, and yet I had helped him. That moment stayed with me. Maybe people don't always need answers. Maybe they just need to be heard. By the end of day 2, I realized something important. Silence is not empty. It is full of space. Space for others to speak. Space for thoughts to grow. Space for understanding. But silence also shows something else. It shows discomfort, not just in others, but in yourself. There were still moments when I wanted to speak, to react, to correct, to join in. Sometimes it felt difficult to stop myself, but every time I stayed silent, I learned something about others and about myself. That night, I sat alone for a while, thinking about the day, not analyzing, not judging, just observing. 2 days without speaking much, and already things felt different. People were different. Conversations were different. Even I was different. But I still didn't know how deep this change would go. There were still 5 more days. 5 more days of silence. And something told me the hardest part was still ahead. Day 3 began, more quietly than before. Not because the world was silent, but because I was. By now, The silence was no longer strange. It was becoming natural. I didn't have to remind myself anymore. I didn't have to stop my words. They simply didn't come. At breakfast, something had changed again. No one asked why I was quiet. No one looked confused. They just accepted it. And something interesting happened. The conversation around me became calmer, slower, less noisy, as if my silence was influencing the space around me. I listened, not just to the words, but to the tone, to what was said and what was not said. I noticed small tensions, small emotions, things I had never seen so clearly before. Without speaking, I had more room to observe, and observation began to feel powerful. At work, the changes became even more visible. People were used to my silence now, but they were also reacting to it. One colleague, who usually talked a lot, started talking less when I was around. Another, who was usually quiet, began speaking more. It was as if my silence was creating space for others to change. That surprised me. I had always thought my behavior only affected me, but now I could see clearly. It affected others too. In a meeting that day, something important happened. There was a discussion. Voices started to rise. People interrupted each other. Everyone wanted to be heard. The energy became tense. Normally, I would join in. I would speak, defend my ideas, try to be part of the conversation. But this time, I stayed silent. I watched, I listened, and slowly, something shifted. One person stopped talking, then another. The noise became softer. The conversation slowed down. And then someone looked at me. "Let's hear from you," they said. The room became quiet. Everyone waited. I felt the attention, not because I demanded it, but because I hadn't used it. I took a breath, picked up a pen, and wrote a short sentence. Clear, simple, focused. I showed it to them. And something unexpected happened. No one interrupted. No one argued immediately. They read it carefully, and then they agreed. Just like that. Not because I was right, but because my words were calm, without emotion, without pressure. That moment stayed with me. Silence doesn't weaken your voice. It strengthens it when you choose to use it. Later that day, I had another realization. Without speaking, I had more energy. No need to respond quickly, no need to explain everything, no need to defend myself. That saved energy for something else, for thinking, for observing, for understanding. I felt more focused, more present, less scattered. But silence also revealed something deeper. It showed me how often I used words to protect myself, to hide uncertainty, to avoid awkward moments, to fill empty space. Without those words, I felt more exposed, but also more honest. There was no mask, just me, and that was both uncomfortable and freeing. As the day ended, I walked home slowly, watching people, watching their movements, their expressions. Many were speaking, on phones, with friends, with themselves. Constant noise. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to join it. I felt separate, but not lonely. Calm, but not empty. When I arrived home, I sat quietly, thinking about everything that had changed 3 days ago. Silence felt like a loss. Now, it felt like a tool, a quiet kind of strength. But deep inside, I knew something else. This was only the beginning, because the longer I stayed silent, the more I started to see, and not everything I was about to see would be easy to accept. Day 4 arrived, and something felt different. Not outside, but inside me. The silence was no longer just an action, it had become a habit. I didn't think about speaking anymore. I didn't stop myself. It simply wasn't there. And that's when things started to go deeper. Because when you remove something familiar, like speaking, you begin to see what was hiding underneath. That morning, I noticed my thoughts more clearly than ever before. Not just what I was thinking, but how I was thinking. Small reactions, quick judgments, unnecessary worries. Normally, I would speak, and those thoughts would disappear. But now, they stayed, and I had to face them. At first, it was uncomfortable. I realized how often my mind was not calm. Even when I looked calm on the outside, that was surprising. Silence on the outside does not mean silence on the inside. But slowly, something began to change because I was not escaping my thoughts anymore. They started to slow down, like water, becoming still. At work, the reactions from others continued to evolve. People now treated me with a different kind of respect. Not loud respect, not obvious, but quiet. They interrupted me less, they listened more. They gave me space to think. Even when I didn't speak, I felt included. That was new. Before, I thought I had to speak, to be part of something. Now, I was part of it, without saying a word. But not everything was easy. There were moments when silence created distance. At lunch, a group of colleagues were laughing, sharing stories, talking freely. I sat with them, smiling, listening. But this time, I felt something else, a small distance. Not because they pushed me away, but because I chose not to step in. That feeling was real. Silence can connect you, but it can also separate you. And I had to understand both sides. Later that afternoon, something even more important happened. A misunderstanding. Someone thought I was being unfriendly, cold, distant, because I didn't respond much, because I didn't join conversations. They didn't see my intention, they only saw my silence. That made me realize something important. People don't always understand silence. They can misinterpret it. They can create stories about it. And if you don't speak, you don't correct those stories. For a moment, I wanted to break the silence, explain myself, clarify everything. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed calm and I observed how quickly people create meaning, even when there are no words. That was powerful. It showed me something about communication. Words are not the only thing people use to understand you. They look at your actions, your energy, your presence, and sometimes they guess. Not always correctly. That evening, I walked outside alone. The world felt quieter again. Or maybe I was just hearing it differently. The sound of the wind, footsteps, distant voices, small details that used to disappear in noise. Now, they were clear. And in that quiet moment, I asked myself something honest. Why do I usually talk so much? The answer came slowly. To be accepted, to be understood, to feel connected. But now, I was learning something new. Connection does not always need words. Understanding does not always come from speaking. And acceptance does not always come from explaining yourself. Sometimes it comes from simply being present. Day 4 ended with a different kind of awareness, not just about others, but about myself. But there were still 3 more days, and something told me the final lessons would be the ones I would never forget. Day 5, day 6, and then day 7. The silence stayed with me, not as a rule anymore, but as something natural. By now, people had fully adjusted. No more confusion, no more surprise. They accepted my quiet presence as part of who I was. And something interesting happened. The way they treated me became calmer, more respectful, more thoughtful. Not because I asked for it, but because I created space for it. When you speak less, people listen more. When you react less, people observe more. When you slow down, others begin to slow down too. But the biggest change was not in them, it was in me. By day 5, my mind was clearer than ever, not empty, not silent all the time, but organized. Thoughts came and passed without pressure, without noise. I no longer felt the need to respond to everything, to explain everything, to prove anything. That feeling was freeing. On day 6, I noticed something deeper. I was more aware of my emotions, small changes, small reactions, things I usually ignored or covered with words. Now, I could feel them clearly. And instead of reacting quickly, I could choose. That was new. Silence gave me a small space between feeling and action. And in that space, there was control, real control, not forced, not fake, just awareness. And then came day 7, the final day. I woke up, and for a moment, I forgot everything. I almost spoke, but I stopped and smiled, because now, silence was not difficult anymore. It was part of me. That day, I moved through the world calmly. At work, people still listened carefully when I shared something. At home, conversations felt softer, even without many words. I felt connected, not distant, not separate, connected in a quieter way. And then the day ended. 7 days, without speaking much. 7 days of observing, listening, understanding. That night, I sat alone, thinking about everything. What had changed? Was it worth it? The answer was simple. Yes, but not for the reasons I expected. I didn't become a different person. I didn't change my life completely, but I gained something small and powerful: awareness. I learned that words are not always necessary, that silence can carry meaning, that listening is often more important than speaking. And most importantly, I learned this: you don't have to fill every moment with noise to be valued. You don't have to speak all the time to be heard. Sometimes your presence is enough. The next morning, I spoke again. Simple words: good morning. It felt different, more intentional, more real, not automatic. And from that day on, I didn't stop speaking, but I stopped speaking without thinking. I chose my words more carefully. I listened more deeply, and sometimes I chose silence because now I understood its power. Thank you for listening. If this story made you think or helped you feel a little calmer, consider subscribing to the channel. Slow down, listen more, and I'll see you in the next story.